Something reportedly went very wrong behind the private walls of Balmoral, and Catherine may have been the first senior royal to notice. An unexpected aide allegedly appeared where they were not supposed to be. A sensitive royal briefing was reportedly brought to a halt, and King Charles was said to have taken control of the situation. But here's the important part. There is no official confirmation that this exact incident happened. So what is fact, what is speculation, and why has this particular Balmoral story attracted so much attention? Because once you understand how important privacy is at Balmoral, the alleged incident becomes far more intriguing. And this may not be about a dramatic royal argument at all. It may be about something much more important: control, confidentiality, and who gets access to the king's inner circle. Balmoral has always been different from Buckingham Palace. When the royal family is at Buckingham Palace, almost everything happens under the public microscope. There are official engagements. There are photographers. There are ministers, diplomats, advisors, and staff coming and going. The atmosphere is formal. Balmoral is different. The Scottish estate has traditionally been associated with family time, privacy, and a much more relaxed side of royal life. And that distinction matters enormously to this story. Balmoral Castle closed to the public on August 9th, marking the beginning of the estate's private period for the season. King Charles has also continued his Scottish program, with royal engagements taking place in the region during August. So this isn't some random moment on the royal calendar. The family is moving into a period when Balmoral once again becomes an important private base. And according to the dramatic claim behind today's story, it was during this sensitive period that Catherine allegedly noticed someone who apparently wasn't expected to be involved. That is the allegation. But now we need to separate the headline from what can actually be established. The story making the rounds suggests that Catherine became aware of an aide who was apparently not expected to be present during a private royal discussion. The identity of this alleged aide has not been reliably established, and there is no official palace statement confirming that Catherine confronted an unauthorized member of staff. That means we cannot responsibly present the incident as a confirmed royal showdown. But let's look at why the claim has generated so much speculation. Imagine a private meeting involving senior members of the royal family. There is sensitive information being discussed. There are only supposed to be certain people in the room. Then someone unfamiliar, or someone who was not expected, appears. What happens? The first reaction would probably not be dramatic. It would be practical. Who authorized this person? Why are they here? Were they supposed to attend? What information have they already heard? And perhaps most importantly, who allowed them in? That final question could be particularly important inside a royal environment, because information is currency. A private conversation can become tomorrow's newspaper headline. A comment made behind closed doors can suddenly become a national controversy. And an innocent briefing can be transformed into a media storm if confidential details reach the wrong person. So if anything resembling this scenario really occurred, it would not necessarily require shouting, accusations, or a dramatic confrontation. A simple decision to stop the meeting could have been enough. And that's where King Charles reportedly enters the story. The most dramatic part of the claim is that the royal briefing was reportedly stopped. Again, there is no official confirmation of this specific incident. But let's consider what such a decision could mean if it did happen. Stopping a briefing doesn't automatically mean that somebody has been caught doing something wrong. There are many perfectly ordinary reasons why a briefing might be postponed. The wrong people could be present. The information could have changed. The king could decide that the subject is too sensitive for a wider group. A senior advisor could be unavailable. Or Charles could simply decide that the conversation should happen privately. So while the headline makes it sound like a royal crisis, the reality could be much less dramatic. But there is another angle. If Catherine genuinely noticed a problem and Charles then immediately decided that the briefing should not continue, it would demonstrate something about the king's approach to his role. He has spent years preparing for the responsibilities of the monarchy, and one of those responsibilities is managing information. The monarch doesn't personally handle every piece of information. There are advisors, private secretaries, communications staff, household employees, and security personnel. But ultimately, sensitive decisions remain the responsibility of the senior royals. That means Charles would have every reason to be cautious. And this is where the story becomes less about an uninvited aide and more about who controls the royal information flow. Now let's talk about Catherine. The Princess of Wales has become one of the most prominent members of the modern royal family, but she is also known for maintaining a clear boundary between her public role and her private family life. That boundary became especially important during the intense public scrutiny surrounding her health and return to royal duties. For Catherine, privacy has not simply been a luxury. It has become an essential part of how she manages public life. And Balmoral represents perhaps the ultimate version of that privacy. The estate has long been associated with family gatherings and informal royal traditions. The late Queen Elizabeth II regarded Balmoral as a particularly special place. King Charles has also spoken about its significance, and the Wales family has been seen spending private family time there. So if Catherine were involved in a sensitive discussion at Balmoral, it would be reasonable to expect her to be particularly conscious of who was present. But that does not mean the dramatic claim is automatically true. We have to be careful. There is a major difference between saying, Catherine reportedly noticed an unexpected person, and saying, Catherine caught a secret aide and exposed a royal plot. The first is an allegation that can be discussed. The second would require evidence. And right now, that evidence has not been publicly produced. This is the question many viewers may be asking. After all, royal households have hundreds of employees. People work behind the scenes every day. So why would one aide supposedly appearing somewhere cause such a reaction? The answer is simple. Not every piece of information is meant for every member of staff. Think about how a modern organization operates. A company might have hundreds or thousands of employees, but only a small group would be allowed into a confidential board meeting. The royal family works in a similar way. There are different levels of responsibility. Some staff handle schedules. Others deal with correspondence. Some work on communications. Others handle security. And senior private secretaries may have access to extremely sensitive information. So an unexpected person in a confidential setting could create a legitimate question about protocol. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean wrongdoing. Perhaps the person was authorized. Perhaps they were there for a completely legitimate reason. Perhaps the original account misunderstood the situation. That is why we need evidence before reaching a conclusion. The word briefing also needs some context. When people hear the word, they might imagine a dramatic secret meeting in which senior royals discuss explosive revelations. Real royal briefings can be much more ordinary. They can involve schedules, upcoming engagements, security arrangements, public statements, charitable work, diplomatic events, family logistics, media issues, and preparations for major occasions. Some briefings are formal. Others can be informal conversations between a royal and their advisors. So if a briefing was delayed or cancelled, that alone would not prove there was a crisis. However, the claim becomes more interesting because it reportedly happened in connection with an unexpected aide. If both elements were connected, then the logical question would be, what information was considered sensitive enough to stop the discussion? And that's the question that remains unanswered. To understand why this story feels so dramatic, you have to understand Balmoral itself. The estate is not simply another royal property. It carries decades of family history. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert famously developed Balmoral into a beloved Scottish retreat. Generations of the royal family have returned there. And for Queen Elizabeth II, Balmoral became strongly associated with the private side of royal life. Her final days were spent at the estate in September 2022. That history gives Balmoral an emotional significance that Buckingham Palace simply cannot replicate. It is connected to family memories, traditions, summer holidays, long walks, barbecues, informal gatherings, and moments away from public duties. That is why privacy at Balmoral matters. When the royal family arrives there, they aren't simply changing locations. They are moving into a different environment. An environment where the distinction between the monarchy and the family becomes much more visible. And that makes any allegation about an unexpected staff member particularly intriguing. Here's another possibility that should not be ignored. If there really was an unexpected individual present, the issue could have been security rather than politics. Royal residences operate with strict security arrangements. Senior members of the royal family cannot simply allow unknown people to wander into private meetings. There are procedures. There are staff lists. There are security checks. There are designated areas. So perhaps the alleged incident was simply a misunderstanding. Maybe someone arrived early. Maybe their role had changed. Maybe another member of staff authorized them. Or perhaps Catherine simply asked a normal question about why the person was there. From the outside, that could easily become exaggerated into, Catherine catches secret aide. And once social media gets involved, the story can become even more dramatic. A minor procedural question can turn into a supposed royal confrontation within hours. That's why caution is necessary. But there is one thing that makes the story especially fascinating. The royal family often doesn't respond to every rumor. In fact, the palace frequently remains silent about stories that are circulating online. That silence can frustrate audiences. People naturally think, if it's false, why don't they deny it? But there is a reason. If the palace responded to every rumor, it could create a never-ending cycle. A story appears. The palace denies it. The denial becomes another headline. A new version appears. Another statement follows. And suddenly the royal family is spending all its time responding to speculation. So silence can sometimes be strategic. And if Charles really did stop a briefing, the same philosophy could apply. Perhaps the decision was simply, don't discuss it. Don't escalate it. Don't give it oxygen. Keep the matter private. And move on. There is also a wider significance for William and Catherine. The future of the monarchy increasingly depends on their generation. King Charles is the reigning monarch. But William is the heir. And Catherine is one of the most visible figures associated with the future monarchy. That means their approach to privacy, staff and information matters. William and Catherine have repeatedly tried to create a more controlled environment around their family. Their children are growing up under extraordinary public attention. Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis are among the most watched young members of the royal family in the world. So the Wales household has every incentive to protect private family moments. This doesn't prove that Catherine confronted anyone at Balmoral, but it does provide context for why a story involving access and confidentiality might attract so much attention. The modern royal family is constantly balancing two competing demands. The public wants access. The family wants privacy. And Balmoral has historically been one of the places where privacy wins. So let's pause and separate the confirmed information from the speculation. What do we actually know? We know Balmoral Castle has entered its private period after closing to the public on August 9th. We know King Charles has continued royal activity in Scotland during August. We know Balmoral remains an important private residence associated with the royal family. We know the estate has enormous historical and emotional significance. But what don't we know? We don't have official confirmation that Catherine spotted an unauthorized aide. We don't have a verified identity for the alleged aide. We don't have confirmation that the aide was actually uninvited. And we don't have official confirmation that King Charles stopped a royal briefing because of this alleged incident. Those details remain unverified. And that's important because dramatic royal headlines can sometimes take a small piece of information and build an entire narrative around it. Now let's consider the other side. What if more evidence eventually emerges? What if credible reporting confirms that someone unexpectedly attended a sensitive meeting? What if Charles really did halt the discussion? Then the story could become significant. Not necessarily because of a feud, but because it could reveal how seriously the royal household takes confidentiality. It could also raise questions about internal procedures. Who authorized the person? Was there a communication failure? Was the individual supposed to be there? Did someone misunderstand the schedule? And did the king intervene because the information was particularly sensitive? Those would be legitimate questions. And perhaps the most interesting question would be whether the incident was resolved quietly. Because in the royal family, not every crisis becomes public. Some problems are dealt with behind closed doors. No statement. No press conference. No public argument. Just a decision, a change in schedule, and everyone moves forward. If that is what happened, we may never know the full story. There is another reason this story could continue to attract attention. The royal family is entering a period when Balmoral naturally becomes a focus of public interest. Every year people watch for arrivals. They look for photographs. They speculate about which family members will spend time together. They analyze every public appearance. And because Balmoral is private, the information gap becomes enormous. The less the public sees, the more room there is for speculation. One photograph can generate hundreds of theories. One missing royal can trigger endless questions. And one alleged aide can become the center of an entire online narrative. That doesn't mean the narrative is true. It means the environment is perfect for speculation. And that is precisely why viewers should distinguish between confirmed royal news and claims circulating online. Perhaps the most interesting part of this entire story isn't whether Catherine caught someone. It's what the allegation says about her position inside the royal family. Catherine is no longer simply the wife of a future king. She is one of the senior members of the institution. She has her own official responsibilities. She participates in major royal events. She supports numerous causes. And she has become increasingly important to the monarchy's public image. That means her role behind the scenes is also changing. She is likely to be involved in discussions about family logistics, public appearances, and the future direction of the Wales household. But even here we should avoid exaggerating. There is no evidence that Catherine personally ordered Charles to stop a briefing. There is no evidence of a confrontation. And there is no verified evidence of a secret dispute. What we have is a dramatic allegation built around a setting where privacy and confidentiality are genuinely important. For Charles, the alleged incident presents another interesting angle. The king has inherited an institution that is under enormous pressure to modernize while maintaining its traditions. He has to deal with public expectations, media scrutiny, family tensions, constitutional responsibilities, and the constant demand for information. At the same time, he has to protect the private side of his family. That balancing act is incredibly difficult. So if Charles decided to stop a sensitive briefing, the most logical interpretation would not necessarily be something explosive happened. Could simply be the king decided the circumstances were not appropriate for continuing. That may sound less dramatic. But in a royal household, sometimes the quiet decisions are the most important ones. So where does this leave us? The headline claims that Catherine spotted an uninvited aide at Balmoral, and that Charles stopped a royal briefing in response. It certainly makes for a dramatic story. But at this moment, those specific details should be treated as unverified allegations rather than confirmed facts. What is confirmed is that Balmoral has entered its private season, that it remains a deeply important royal residence, and that King Charles is carrying out royal activity in Scotland. Everything beyond that needs evidence. And perhaps that's the most important lesson here. Royal stories can move incredibly quickly. A rumor becomes a headline becomes a video, and suddenly speculation is being repeated as fact. But the real story may ultimately be much more ordinary. A scheduling problem, a security misunderstanding, a confidential discussion postponed, or simply a rumor that grew larger online than it ever was behind the walls of Balmoral. Still, if credible evidence does emerge confirming that an unexpected aide really was present during a sensitive royal briefing, then we will have some very interesting questions to ask. Who was the aide? Why were they there? Who authorized their presence? Why was the briefing allegedly stopped? And perhaps most importantly, what exactly was King Charles trying to keep private? That is the part of this story that remains unanswered. For now, the alleged Balmoral confrontation remains unconfirmed, but the questions surrounding royal privacy, access, and information are very real. And if more credible details emerge, especially from reliable royal correspondence or an official palace source, this story could look very different. So don't mistake the dramatic headline for proven fact. The confirmed picture is much more measured, but sometimes with the royal family, what isn't said can be just as fascinating as what is. What do you think? Was this simply a private royal matter, or could there be more to the Balmoral mystery? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because the next development from Balmoral could raise even bigger questions about Charles, William, and Catherine.